Did you know that the prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament prophesied that in the last days an aggressive leader would rise up out of the nation of Russia with a desire to reassemble the Russian Empire, and that upon assembling that Russian Empire, that they would then take their greed for power and ally other nations in that region of the world, and that they would invade Israel out of the north. That's prophesied in detail, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Ezekiel prophesied that in the last days, many translations use the phrase in the distant future. Ezekiel's prophecy in the 38th and 39th chapters are not prophesied for his era. Ezekiel was about 25 years old when he and his wife were taken into Babylonian captivity. At the age of 30, he became a prophet. One of his contemporaries was the prophet Daniel, who was a bit older than Ezekiel and well known and already established as a notable, respected prophet at that time. But it was Ezekiel who prophesied that in the distant future, he made it very clear, Ezekiel 38 and 39, Ezekiel's prophecy was not for the Jewish people. It was not for those in Babylonian captivity, nor was it for that era of time. He very carefully articulated in the distant future, and then gave to us details to help us know when that would be fulfilled. But Ezekiel prophesied in the last days that an aggressive leader out of Russia would arise with a greed and a lust for power, and his attempt is to bring about the reconstruction of the Russian Empire, and he'll succeed. And the Bible not only tells us that he'll succeed, but the Bible tells us that he'll not be content with bringing about the reconstruction of the Russian Empire, but will then turn his eyes towards Israel and will invade Israel out of the north along with a mighty coalition army. And we're going to get into that today. Because as I speak, the eyes of the world are currently, and when I say the eyes of the world, I mean the entire world, is watching Russia as I speak to see the details of this unfolding war. Media outlets around the globe are postulating how far is Vladimir Putin willing to go. And yesterday, as I was studying, it came on the news that they were shelling one of the nuclear plants in Ukraine. And the danger of that, most of us are aware of the horrific apocalyptic event that took place in Chernobyl. And those who understand these matters better than I have said that if they attack and blow up this nuclear plant in the Ukraine, that it potentially will be 6 times worse than Chernobyl. This is the type of madman that we're currently dealing with. Now, listen very carefully. Do not misquote me. In this teaching, I am not saying that Vladimir Putin is God. He is not. I am not saying, listen, I am not saying, do not walk away from this study and say Tiff Shuttlesworth told us that Vladimir Putin is Gog in Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39. However, potentially he could be. I'm not going to give you my opinion on that because it would only be speculation. And I don't believe when you teach Bible prophecy that you should run down roads of speculation. What do we always teach you? Start in the Bible, stay in the Bible, and finish in the Bible. So whether or not Vladimir Putin is Gog in Ezekiel 38 and 39, I do not know. But what I do know is Ezekiel prophesied that in the last days, an aggressive Russian leader would arise with a lust to reassemble the Russian Empire, and that upon assembling the Russian Empire, his lust will then turn towards the nation of Israel. He will amass a great horde of armies from that region of the world, and they will descend down the Euphrates River. The Bible said that the Euphrates River would actually dry up in the last days, and that these allied armies would descend out of the north down the dried up riverbed of the Euphrates to attack Israel. Well, guess which river in recent years has dried up? Now, depending upon rains and seasons, there is still some flow to that. But there have been times in recent years where the Euphrates River has dried up. And that, the Bible prophesied, would become the military highway from the north down through Syria and into the north of Israel, and this Gog and Magog war. The internet is currently trending with people asking, and I'm getting questions from all over the world, what's going on in Russia? Does this have anything to do with Bible prophecy? And if so, how? And so that's why I'm doing this teaching today. And so if you're taking notes, be sure to write this down. Everything that we're teaching today about Russia's role in final Bible prophecy is found in Ezekiel chapter 38 and Ezekiel chapter 39. To be more specific, Ezekiel speaks specifically from Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 1 all the way through Ezekiel chapter 39 and verse 24. Be sure to write that down. Ezekiel's Gog and Magog prophecy begins in Ezekiel 38 and verse 1 and goes into Ezekiel chapter 39 all the way through verse 24. Now, I don't have time to teach on it today, but Ezekiel 36, Ezekiel 37, Ezekiel 38, Ezekiel 39, all of that is prophetic and very detailed concerning Israel in the last days. In a thumbnail, Ezekiel 36 deals with the fact that God is going to begin to regather the children of Israel, the Jewish people, from the ends of the earth after they have been dispersed on two separate occasions. And then the Bible tells us they were driven out of the land in AD 70, again in AD 135. There they were dispersed to the ends of the earth. God said in the last days He'll regather them. That is being fulfilled. Many would say it has been fulfilled. Between America and Israel, the rest of the world combined has less than 17% of all Jews in the world. The greatest percentage of Jews in the world are currently in Israel, and that varies depending upon polling, but it's about 6.8 to 7 million Jews who currently reside in Israel, and about 6.3 to 6.5 million Jews reside within the area of New York City. But between New York City and Israel, the remaining Jews in the remainder of the world is less than 17%. And even what we're watching going on in the news as I speak in Ukraine, many of you have seen that the Jews in Ukraine are doing their best to flee to Israel. This is straight out of the Bible. Ezekiel 36 and 37 tells us that Israel will be regathered in stages. Ezekiel chapter 37 speaks about the dry bones and God beginning to gather them bone by bone, piece by piece, muscle by muscle. In other words, Ezekiel 37 is talking about a systematic regathering of the nation of Israel to their homeland. That is fulfilled as we speak. And so what happens after Ezekiel 37 and the regathering of the Jews from around the world to the homeland, which the Jews refer to that as Aliyah, returning to their homeland? Ezekiel 38. So after the regathering of Israel to their homeland, the rebuilding of their nation, May 14th, 1948, Jerusalem reestablished by the United States, and allied nations recognized Jerusalem as their capital. When did that take place? May 14th, 2018, 70 years to the exact day after Israel was reborn as a nation. And then in Ezekiel 38, we move to the Magog War. 3 questions I want to answer. If you're taking notes, question number 1, where do we find Russia in the Bible? Many people have sent that question in to me. If what's going on in Russia is in Bible prophecy, where do we find Russia in the Bible? Well, I read to you out of Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 1 through 6. Look at verse 2. Ezekiel 38, verse 2. Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog. Now, I'm going to define who Gog and Magog are. Be patient. But what I want you to highlight, the prince of Rosh. Some would pronounce that and say that the proper pronunciation is Rosh. I'm not going to take points off your final exam either way. The prince of Rosh, the prince of Rosh, Meshach and Tubal. Now, let me pause long enough to say there are many that I've heard who are trying to teach, and when I hear them say things like this, I know that they're not deep students of prophecy, but probably surface students of prophecy. But even in recent days, I've heard people say Meshach is Moscow and Tubal is Tobolsk, which are 2 major cities in Russia. They are not. So if you hear anyone teaching that Meshach is Moscow and that Tubal is Tobolsk, that is inaccurate. They are not cities in Russia. It refers to different land masses. The Bible says, Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Highlight that. Prophesy against him. Who's him? Gog. So Gog is not a land. Gog is a leader. We'll come back to that. Prophesy against him, verse 3, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, prince of Rosh. And prince from the originals simply speaks of a person of high authority and high leadership. So Gog is a prince in Rosh. Gog is a person. Magog is a land. Write that down. Gog is a leader. Magog is a land. Gog is a leader. It speaks specifically of a man, a prince of Magog. Gog is a leader. Magog is a land. O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshach and Tubal, I will turn you about and put hooks into your jaws and bring you out. So over 2,500 years ago, the prophet Ezekiel speaks of a group of allied nations that are going to attack Israel in the distant future. Now, none of these nations are called Russia in our modern English translations of the Bible. In other words, the word specifically, Russia, is not found anywhere in an accurate English translation of the Bible. However, the reference to Rosh or Rosh in Ezekiel 38 and 2 is a shortened version of modern Russia. So let me be clear. Rosh is Russia. We don't think it is. There's not a whole lot of debate, at least among reputable scholarship. It is absolutely clear by the reference of geography that the landmass in the distant north above Israel is Russia. Now remember that Israel is the centerpiece in the Bible, both prophetically and geographically. Now that's so important. That's just a Bible prophecy gold nugget. Please write it down. Let me say it again for emphasis. When you study Bible prophecy, Israel is the centerpiece, both prophetically and geographically. So here, for example, when Ezekiel the prophet 2,500 years ago speaks about the land in the distant north, it is speaking concerning Israel being the centerpiece of the prophetic compass and the land due north. Moscow is located 1,662 miles due north of Jerusalem. There's a graphic that you'll see. And in that graphic, what I want you to see, not only is Moscow 1,662 miles due north of Jerusalem, the bearing degree on a compass from Jerusalem to Moscow is approximately only 4 degrees. And sometimes in reading eschatology authors and various papers and books and textbooks, you'll hear the statement made, Moscow is due north of Jerusalem. Well, that's pretty much accurate. There's only 4 degrees of difference approximately on the compass. So when you understand that Israel is the centerpiece of Bible prophecy, both prophetically and geographically, then you can identify Ezekiel's geography as well as prophecy when he refers to the landmass to the distant north. Now, I've taught on this before, and I recently had an individual that said, that's a lie. You know, Syria is north of Israel. Well, I obviously understand geography. I know that Syria is on the northern border of Israel. What I am saying is the major landmass of empire power is not talking about Syria. It's talking about Rosh, which is Russia. So both the Old Testament prophets of Ezekiel and Daniel describe Israel's end-time aggressor as descending from the north. Daniel used the phrase king of the north to describe the commander of these allied nations in Daniel chapter 11. Ezekiel's prophecy also agrees and lends support to Daniel, indicating the invading armies will come from the far north. And it's always amazing. There's always, no matter what you teach, there's always somebody on the internet who has to prove that their IQ is 0.7 degrees higher than yours, and Syria is north. I'm speaking to you hoping that as students of the Bible that you understand that the Bible's talking about empires and ancient land masses. Russia is indeed from the far north. And I emphasize that because for those that want to start playing geography puzzles with me on the internet, first of all, I don't answer your comments. I don't answer foolishness. I only answer serious students. But the Bible specifically says far north, not the nation bordering far north. And of course, any serious student of history knows that national boundaries and national names go through changes on a regular basis. Russia, listen carefully, write it down. Russia is the only modern nation that matches Ezekiel's prophecy and his description. Hands down, no doubt about it. Rosh is Russia. Could I be any more clear on that point? Rosh or Rosh is indeed Russia. It is the only modern nation that matches this description. So the brief answer, if you're talking to a friend, is to say the word Russia is not found in any modern English translation, but in Ezekiel chapter 38, a nation called Rosh is, and we know that prophetically and geographically, Rosh is Russia. Question number 2, who are Gog and Magog? Now listen very carefully because this is a point of confusion even in people in full-time ministry. It's amazing to me how many times I'll hear people in full-time ministry, and not rookies, people that have been in ministry for a quarter of a century or 30 or 40 or more years, confuse this either because they've not been diligent students of prophecy or because they read and assume, because if you just read the Bible and assume that when you hear Gog and Magog anywhere in the Bible, it's the same thing, I'm not condemning it. I understand it's an easy step to be mistaken. So let me point this out to all of our students. There are 2 Gog-Magog wars in final Bible prophecy. Write that down. There are 2 distinct, different Gog and Magog wars in final Bible prophecy. The first one is what we're covering today, found in Ezekiel 38, from Ezekiel 38 verse 1 to Ezekiel 39 and verse 24. That Gog and Magog war is the first Gog-Magog war. There is a second Gog-Magog war, and that is found in Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 through 10. In Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 through 10, there is a second Gog-Magog war. And so in your notes, be sure to have that down. There are 2 Gog-Magog wars. The first is found in Ezekiel 38, verse 1 through 39, verse 24. The second Gog-Magog war is found in Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 through 10. Ezekiel's Gog and Magog war in the 38th and 39th chapter takes place. Now let me be honest about this, as you often hear me say, there are some various views in final Bible prophecy. Not everybody agrees on details. I always want to be humble enough to be respectful of people that may have a disagreement on the timing. But almost all substantial scholarship rests upon a very narrow window on the timing of the first Gog-Magog war in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And it varies. Some believe that it happens immediately after the rapture. Some believe that it happens closer to the halfway point during the tribulation. So there's a span there of 3.5 years. So you may hear, if you study this in depth, you may come across a notable scholar who may make the argument that the battle of Gog and Magog takes place immediately after the rapture. You may find another one who will make a very valid point as to it happens after the rapture, but it happens closer to the end of the first half of the tribulation. I'm not going to be dogmatic on that because I don't believe there's enough in the Bible to drive a stake in the heart of that dogma. I believe that it may happen in one of those 2 windows of time, but I do believe that it will happen, and I do believe the Bible fully supports this. It will happen after the rapture. So if you want to say that the first Gog-Magog war in Ezekiel 38, and people ask you, when is that going to transpire? Just be honest enough to say, there are some who believe it will happen immediately after the rapture. There are some who say that it'll happen closer to the end of the first half of the tribulation. It's not worth having arguments on social media over because it's not essential doctrine.
Là bằng cái đoạn này, và cái đoạn này chính là 2A. Như vậy tìm A, các bạn lấy quỹ đạo chia 2, 10 chia cho 2 được 5. Được chưa? Và lưu ý biên độ của chúng ta luôn luôn là số dương, các bạn không được chọn đáp án là trừ 5 nha. Bài số 2, một chiếc điểm dao động điều hòa trong 10 dao động toàn phần đi được quãng đường là 120 giây. Tính quỹ đạo chuyển động. Hỏi quỹ đạo chuyển động, quỹ đạo của dao động có chiều dài là bao nhiêu? Thì như cái câu trên á, thầy đã nói rồi, trong một dao động thì quãng đường nó đi được luôn là 4A. Như vậy ở đây suy ra trong 10 dao động toàn phần, đúng không ạ? Các bạn nhân lên 10 nhân 4, được chưa? 10 nhân cho 4A, tức là 40A này. Và đề bài người ta cho mình biết quãng đường nó dài 120. Vậy từ đây các bạn suy ra A được, đơn giản đi nó ra là 3 cm. Được chưa? Nhưng bài toán người ta không hỏi về biên độ mà người ta hỏi quỹ đạo. Như vậy tức là cái đoạn A đến trừ A này Vậy các bạn nhân đôi lên, 2 nhân 3 là 6. Do đó câu số 2 này chúng ta sẽ chọn đáp án A. Được chưa? Rồi tiếp tục các bạn qua câu số 3 thử xem coi nó như thế nào đây. Một chất điểm dao động điều hòa với phương trình như màn hình của các bạn quan sát đó. Ly độ của vật khi pha dao động bằng pi. Như vậy đề bài người ta hỏi ly độ là hỏi chữ x khi pha dao động, tức là nguyên cái góc này nè. Đúng không ạ? Nguyên cái góc này là bằng pi. Như vậy các bạn thế vào 5 nhân cos của pha. Pha là nguyên cái góc này, cos của pi. Và cos của pi bằng trừ 1. Trừ 1 nhân 5 ra trừ 5. Vậy đáp án đúng là đáp án A. Câu số 4. Một chất điểm dao động điều hòa có phương trình như màn hình của các bạn quan sát. Tại thời điểm 1 giây